Okay, in this video we're going to review how to factor a trinomial when there is a lead coefficient. So that means there's going to be a number in front of my x squared. So to factor, we're going to make one of those same tables that we made when a was 1, but this time, to begin with, we're going to start off and multiply a times c to put our number into the table. We're still going to take the sign of c, whether it's positive or negative, that's still going to go here. So that does not change. I'm either going to put a positive or a negative depending on the sign of c. Okay. Now, after we have completed the table, remember we look and we say, okay, yes, these two values either add up or subtract depending on if it was positive or if it was negative, to that middle term, our b term. So once we've done that, we've identified which two are there, then we're going to rewrite the expression. Okay, we're going to keep that ax squared and that c at the end, but we're going to replace our b term, okay, with the factors from the table. Then we're going to factor by grouping, which is what we did last week. Remember, we're going to group the first two, group the last two, then we're going to find our GCF in each of them. We're going to factor out what matches and the leftovers, right? We're going to combine all that stuff that we did last week into this week, all right? So let's look at some. So looking at the steps sometimes is a little bit confusing, but then when we break it down to an example, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. So let's look at an example here. We have a trinomial where I have a number in front, so we have a lead coefficient here, okay? So what that means is when I go to do my table, I'm actually going to multiply 3 times 5, which will give me 15. Okay, so that's going to be that a times c there. Then I'm going to take the sign of c, subtraction. This is going to be the same table now that we did last week. So we want numbers that multiply to 15. So it's going to be 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Now they need to subtract to equal a negative 2. So I'm going to subtract the two numbers. So here I'm going to get a 14. Here I'm going to get a 2. If I want it to be a negative 2, that means I'm going to have a negative 5 and a positive 3. So now we've got our factors. Okay. Once we're done with that, we're going to rewrite our expression. So I'm going to keep that 3x squared. I'm going to keep that minus 5, but in the middle, I'm going to write my plus 3x and my minus 5x from the table. Remember, those are coming from the table. Okay, so now that I've written my expression, 3x squared plus 3x minus 5x minus 5, I'm now going to do my grouping. So remember, when I'm grouping, I'm going to take the first two terms and the last two terms. I'm going to find the GCF inside of each group. So if I look at the first two terms, they have a 3 and an x in common, which means when I factor that out, I'm going to be left with an x plus a 1. When I factor the next set, I'm going to notice that I have a negative 5 in common, which is going to leave me with an x plus 1. So remember, now what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to do grouping. So with grouping, I'm going to say, okay, well, they have an x plus 1 in common, so that's going to be one of my factors. And then they have a 3x minus 5 left over. So my two factors are x plus 1 and 3x minus 5. Right? So let's try that process again on another example and see if we can understand this. I'm going to make a table. I see that I have a lead coefficient or a number in front of my x squared. So when I make my table, I'm actually going to put a 12 because 4 times 3 is 12. I'm going to put a plus in the next column. Now I'm coming up with numbers that multiply to equal 12. So that's going to be 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. And they want to add, because we've got a plus here, add up to equal 7. So 12 plus 1 is 13, 6 plus 2 is 8, 3 plus 4 is 7. So I found here, I want to equal a positive 7. So that means I'm going to have a positive 3 and a positive 4. So the next step that I'm going to do, remember I'm going to rewrite my expression. So I'm going to keep that 4x squared. I'm going to keep that 3x, but I'm going to replace my 7x with my 3x plus my 4x. And it does not matter which order that you write these in. If you wanted to put the 4x and then the 3x, does not matter. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to group these together. So I look at my first group and my last group. In this first group, I notice that I have an x in common, which is going to leave me with 4x plus 3 if I factor it out. When I look at the last group, I don't see anything in common. So remember, if there's nothing in common, we say that there's a 1, which will leave me just with the 4x plus 3, which is perfect because now I can see that's my match. So I'm going to have my 4x plus 3, and then my leftover, which is x plus 1. So I'm going to try another one here. I'm going to first multiply that 2 times that 7 to give me a 14. It's going to be subtraction here. So I'm going to say 1 times 14, 2 times 7. I'm going to be subtracting them, so I'll get 13 and 5. I'm trying to equal a positive 13. So that means I'm going to have a negative 1 and a positive 14 will give me a positive 13. Okay, I'm going to rewrite my expression, keeping that 2x squared and that minus 7, replacing that middle term with my negative 1x plus 14x. I'm going to group these together, group the first two, group the last two. So in that first set, I notice I just have an x in common, which is going to leave me with 2x minus 1. In the next set, I notice that I have a 7 in common, which is going to leave me with 2x minus 1. Remember, I'm dividing that value out. Then I'm going to find my match, which is 2x minus 1, and my leftover, which is x plus 7. All right, so let's try this last one. Same process. I'm going to try to do it without as many writing down the steps, so maybe you can get the idea without me drawing all of the arrows and all that. See if we can get it going. I'm going to put an 18 and a plus. I've got 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. I'm adding them together. I'm trying to equal a negative 11, so that's going to be a negative 2 and a negative 9 gives me negative 11. 6x squared minus 2x minus 9x plus 3. I'm going to group. Here I'm going to have a 2x in common, leaves me with 3x minus 1. Here I'm going to bring out a negative 3, which is going to leave me with 3x minus 1. I see I've got a match. And then my leftover is there. So some of us might be more towards the first example where we're drawing our lines, we're showing everything A times C, we're listing everything in the table, we're writing every step down. Some of us might be able to jump to kind of like how we did on this last one, where we kind of have the bare minimum. I see the table, I see my expression rewritten, I see the grouping, I see the answer. So just kind of gauge where you are, and hopefully we are able to now factor with a lead coefficient.